Good afternoon and welcome to Hudson Institute here in Washington, D.C. We are a research organization dedicated to promoting American leadership for a secure, free, and prosperous future. My name is Jeremy Hunt and I'm a media fellow here. And I'm so honored to have with us Congressman Dan Crenshaw of Texas, who is joining us today. And we're going to be talking about policy, specifically with regards to China. I want to talk about Congress's role in countering China. And I want to first just by sharing a little bit of Congressman Crenshaw's background. He's a proud sixth generation Texan. And from an early age, Representative Crenshaw knew that he wanted to serve his country with the most elite fighting force in history, the U.S. Navy SEALs. Following his graduation from Tufts, he immediately reported to SEAL training in Coronado, California. And after graduating SEAL training, Crenshaw deployed to Fallujah, Iraq to join SEAL Team 3, his first of 5 deployments overseas. He retired in September of 2016 as a lieutenant commander after serving 10 years in the SEAL teams. And soon after, Representative Crenshaw completed his master's in public administration at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And in November 2018, he was elected to represent the people of Texas in the 2nd Congressional District in Texas. In Congress, he serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which, as many of you know, has the broadest jurisdiction of any legislative committee in Congress. And on this committee, he serves on the Subcommittee on Health, as well as the Subcommittee on Environment, Manufacturing and Critical Materials, and the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. And he also serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And on this committee, he serves on the Central Intelligence Agency Subcommittee and the National Intelligence Enterprise Subcommittee. So it's just such a huge honor to have you here with us, Congressman. Right. And I wanted to just start off by, many of us national security-minded conservatives are celebrating what we see as a major victory of passing the foreign aid packages that just recently passed in Congress. And you were obviously instrumental with that. And you've been a voice for the importance of standing up for American leadership. And I want to just for folks at home, what is the importance of the package? Why is this? Could you walk us through just the importance of why this needed to be passed?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's multiple categories in the supplemental. Dealing with Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine being the main ones, and they all get to, I think, a fundamental question of do we want a stable world where the global economy is led by the United States of America, as it has been for the past 75, 80 years, or do we want a more chaotic world that is more reminiscent of the pre-World War II era, where countries invade countries because they want their stuff? Mm-hmm. And global supply chains aren't really a thing. You don't have a lot of the modern, not just creature comforts, that's not the right way to put it, but modern technologies that save lives, make your life better, that you would otherwise have. And so that connection isn't made often enough. It's like it is about the plight of this particular people, whether we're talking about Taiwan, Israel, or Ukraine. It is about just the moral duty to stop genocide, okay, and protect human rights. But you can't do that for everyone. So you do need to explain these policies to people in a way that I think brings it back home a little bit and helps people understand what is in their self-interest. And look, it's in our self-interest to continue being the leader of the global economy. And there is a domino effect based on basic human incentives, wherein if one dictator figures out that they can just overrule a country, subjugate it, enslave it, well, then the next dictator will do the same thing, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. And that's been normal for thousands of years, by the way. That's just the human condition for thousands of years. The big difference that we're all familiar with is the post-World War II era, where we just didn't let that happen. Mm-hmm. And that's just not appreciated very often, and so a lot of reasons to support our allies, but they're usually described in these kind of starry-eyed, intangible, moral benefits of protecting democracy and freedom and doing what's right and all that. And that's all well and good. That's all true. But I think it's important to bring it back to just steely self-interest.
That's right.
And so yeah, that's the fundamental reason why you support it. With Ukraine specifically, it's also one more note to make would be that there's 2 options, okay? And people don't like to hear it this way because they want this sort of magical third option where they just get like peace or something, right, which I always think is hilariously naive. But right, it would be hilarious if it weren't such a dangerous way to think. Because the thing about their position is it leads to war. And I want you to ask, I just ask people simple questions. So our decision to vote yes or no on Ukraine aid has a very verifiable effect. And it will either mean Putin wins or he loses or at least stays where he's at. Okay, those are the two options. It is guaranteed that he's able to keep coming through if the Ukrainians lose, their access to artillery rounds and other weapons. Okay, so those are your options, whether you like it or not. And people don't like to hear that, but those are your options. And it is up to you. You have the power, and you're the only one with the power. Again, the people you're arguing with will demur and they'll say, but if Europeans could step up. No, not in this way. They can't. They've done what they can. They've pretty much matched us as a whole. So I'm just telling you, those are the two options. And then you have to convince me that the option where Putin wins and overtakes Ukraine, subjugates its people, continues this massive buildup of his own military, his own military-industrial complex as well. Their ability to manufacture additional tanks and additional artillery is pretty astounding. And now they're on the border of 4 additional NATO countries, and you're going to tell me that doesn't bring us closer to war? Right. So it's the irony of the people who scream, that they want peace, and like Marjorie's in this category. She's like, we should want peace. What a thought. What a beautiful thought. But the other side always has a say in that. And if you take time to think about this situation a little bit, not stopping Putin where he's at now is the likeliest thing to lead us to war. Because of the situation I just laid out. I just don't think that point's certainly never been made by the president. I'm not sure he's even thought about it very much. But it should have been made by at least somebody in the administration, and that's been a frustration that it hasn't.
Absolutely. I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say I appreciate just the messaging that you've done on it and really articulating this to the American people in a way that some haven't, and it really matters. I want to talk a little bit about China as well, and in which way and what are the most important ways do you see the most important provisions in the supplemental that you think best kind of goes towards our aims of countering China?
Yeah, it's pretty basic stuff. It's investing in weapons systems that scare them. Okay, a Columbia class submarine is an extremely scary capability. Yeah. Nobody in the world can match what we can on the submarine front. That is our exquisite deterrent against other powers. So continuing investment in those technologies is of course important. This was a small part of that. We've been investing in that for a long time. And look, just giving the Taiwanese the foreign military financing credits that they need to just buy the weapons they need, yeah. And then making sure that we're actually, and that has a consequence as well of reawakening a lot of these production lines that I think have been too dormant for too long. Ukraine has that effect as well, and so there's been a lot of good strategic value actually out of the Ukrainians fighting back against the Russians and our support for them. Because it has exposed what is a real problem in our military-industrial complex, mm-hmm. Which is that it's kind of dormant. It's become atrophied. So you have to have demand in order for the private sector to want to bring those production lines back on. Right. And there's different weapon systems for both of those cases. But in the end, to defeat China, there's a whole bunch of things you need to do, but you have to invest in capabilities that they can't really deter, and you have to invest in Taiwan, making it a porcupine that is so costly to invade that they just don't want to.
Right, and of course we know that the Chinese Communist Party is investing in their own military at a clip far quicker than our own, and so that is a huge part as well. And we hear this kind of from some so-called China hawks that they'll say that they'll seem to emphasize concerns about China and downplay Ukraine and downplay Russia and Iran. But don't you see how in which ways are all these issues kind of connected?
They're definitely connected. Kind of the first answer I gave. They're connected because we need a stable world that's run by us. Right. That's in your interest. So that's the simplest way to explain it to the American people. Why does this matter to you? Because your entire way of life is predicated on a stable global economy that we run. Nobody appreciates that enough, and you cannot say it enough. And our leaders have failed to make that case for so long, and it's very frustrating to me because it makes my political job way harder.
That's right.
Right. I wish people just understood global economics, but they don't. And so you got to start there and then get to here. And by that time, they're already angry at you. So it's and so I can't tell you how much that frustrates me. But a simple example of how they're connected is, well, look, if you're Xi Jinping and you realize that the West will only support Ukraine for 2 years, you've just adapted that to your planning if you want to invade Taiwan. Got it. Their clock is about 2 years. That's what we know. Then the public gets frustrated and then they leave. So that's a pretty dangerous signal to send.
Right.
And I don't like that. Everyone's like, well, why is it up to? People get very frustrated by these explanations because and in the end they're frustrated because they want a different world.
Right.
And I'm like, I want a different world too. We can write a fiction novel about it if you'd like, and we can read it together, but it's not real.
Yeah.
The real world is this, and there are bad people in it, and bad people, just like all people, operate off incentives, and they respond to strength. And so you have to demonstrate that strength and that deterrence to get them to not do what you don't want them to do. I mean, it's really, everything is that simple and therefore connected.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the TikTok divestment, kind of the divestment bill. You've been at the forefront of that and really raising awareness about this issue before it, kind of caught fire. And I think for a lot of us, we've seen this coming, just how dangerous it is on so many different levels for our kids. It's dangerous in collecting data. There's just the idea that the number one news source for young people comes from the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. So could you just talk a little bit about we've seen attacks on the process of it, that, this is some attack on free speech. I mean, some folks are kind of parroting some China talking points. Could you talk a little bit about the process of it, what actually happens with this forced sale, and how it's limited in scope, and then why you support it?
Yeah, it was carefully drafted legislation, and I think a lot of thought was put into it, realizing that there would be challenges on a First Amendment basis. It's a bit unprecedented in many ways. And so the final legislation being what it is, which is an entity can't be controlled by a foreign adversary according to our legal definition of what we label as foreign adversaries, which involves more than just China. And well, that seems like a pretty reasonable thing that I think will absolutely stand up to any kind of court scrutiny on it. And so this was a very collaborative process. I wasn't a part of it, so I can't really help you with step by step like how this got thought out and what some of the original ideas were versus how it ended up. But I think there's pretty wide agreement that it's going to work. And then the real question is, does ByteDance, so ByteDance is TikTok's parent company, right. It's the real owner, and they're actually located in China, and one of their board members' seats is given to a Chinese Communist Party member. There's been plenty of exposed evidence. I think when I saw in the news just recently of data they're forcibly transferred to ByteDance. So all the stories of TikTok not collecting your data, well, they collect your data, of course, but the stories of them not giving it to China it's all been proven false over and over again.
Right.
But will it stand up to scrutiny? Yes. And look, American investors should be chomping at the bit to try and buy this. Now, will China try and get in the way of that? That's what they're saying they will do right now. So does that mean TikTok disappears? Yeah, that is what it means. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. That's technically what it means. I still don't think that happens. I still think in the end they'd rather take, I don't know what the valuation of TikTok is, but it's probably huge. Right. It's $100 billion maybe. If Twitter was worth $42 billion, and Twitter's crap. I mean, it's all just, I hate Twitter. X, whatever. It hasn't gotten any better. Sorry, Elon.
Well, yours is one of the better accounts on X.
I guess, yeah. I just, I'm not a fan. And TikTok should be worth a lot more users. The other thing is, the company is completely worthless without American content.
Yeah.
That platform is only what it is because of American content. There are no other countries really promoting the content and making it this viral sensation, except for Americans. So, if they don't end up selling it, it'll be because Xi Jinping was just like, meh, and just threw a fit and was like, screw you guys. Which is totally possible, and I feel very bad for everyone who has a TikTok account and like legitimately as a business. There's a lot of the arguments we heard, and I am very sympathetic to those arguments. But I still think in the end, incentives win out, and ByteDance certainly has an incentive to sell it at a huge price, and American investors have a huge incentive to buy it, and then we can all be on TikTok, and it would be great.
Would you join TikTok if it?
I would love to be able to reach that many. I mean, it's got a huge user base. I mean, of course. It's just, but people. The one last thing to say about TikTok is it's not about your data, right? Teenagers don't care that your data is getting stolen. I get it. That's the common reasoning we hear. My problem is and what I always need to explain to people is what the reason we're not okay with it is because it's like a Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. It's like a propaganda Trojan horse. They've gotten you addicted to it. Maybe they're not doing anything nefarious with it now, although there's some evidence that they have, at least here and in other countries. But if they really want to turn on the juice, they can flood your feed with just whatever they want you to see, knowing full well that you're already addicted to it, and knowing that we have like 150 million users in America on it. Like that's an insane tool. I wish I had that tool against the Chinese.
Right.
I mean, it's an incredible propaganda tool and information operations tool. So that's what we're worried about. It's like it's if things got bad, what they could make you see.
Right.
I also just a little like anecdote. One of my little cousins who's on TikTok, he was telling and he's just a kid. He's not following anything political, but I kept showing up on his feed. He's like, that's my cousin Dan, and it's like, what is it about your algorithm that is making you see me? Right. It's because I'm getting bashed on TikTok. Of course, I'm very unpopular with TikTok influencers, as you might imagine. And so that just goes to show, though, that he's never shown any interest in politics. He doesn't follow anything political. But it shows how they can absolutely manipulate the algorithm because they're effectively advertising the Crenshaw propaganda on that platform. Right. Just a small sample of it.
Absolutely. And we know it's not just TikTok. I mean, there are other, even American companies who are very dependent on China. And many say that if we really want to counter China, there's a big part to play of private companies as well. What do you say to that?
Yes. I mean, that's a big question. So, it's like which sector? I mean, what I have seen talking to the private sector and I think just sort of looking at the general data is that there's sort of a voluntary divestment, or at least diversifying in the business community, and of course there would be. You're seeing everything that's been going on for the last 5 to 10 years. Any smart business is going to be trying to diversify their manufacturing from China. Mm-hmm. If that means Vietnam, okay, but I'd like to see it at least nearshoring, if not onshoring. That's a complicated question from a policy perspective because it's, how do we do it? How do we get people to build something here? And the answer is always like, give them a grant. Well, fine, but then why not maybe also change some regulations so that it's just cheaper to build here in the first place, man. Not have to give them so much money in grants or tax credits. You could just waive some of the environmental review regulations that are so onerous that nobody wants to build anything. Right. There's a lot of things that we need to be cognizant of. We're not totally losing the battle of also just worldwide investment. I heard something very interesting today, which I did not know, that in the maybe past decade or so, if you looked at Chinese investment in other countries, it was like 6 times what the U.S. is, and now it's actually starting to fall below. So that's interesting. So they're running out of steam. Their economy is slowing. They're not the giant dragon that maybe we've built them up to be, but nevertheless, it's still good to treat them that way, just right. So we're always on top.
Yeah, and on that note, we've seen that because their economy has been stagnant, we're seeing this dramatic uptick in the number of Chinese nationals that are crossing the border here in the United States. I think the numbers are over 25,000, which is already this fiscal year is already more than the entire of of fiscal year 23, and we're already there in fiscal year 24 with 6 more months to go. 25,000 Chinese nationals, most of them kind of military age males. And it doesn't seem like we have many answers about why they're here. I mean, what are the? I mean, it's amazing how the border crisis creates so many other crises in the process. What are the main questions that we should be asking to get to the bottom of that?
Well, it's individually dependent, of course. But I will say, like the most likely answer is the simplest one, which is they're trying to escape their crappy country. Well, there's also, it's in general, men are more capable of affording the trip. It costs a Chinese national, like, God, depends on who you talk to and what day of the week it is, but $30,000 to make that trip. You have to pay traffickers $30,000 if you're from China. I've heard that number thrown out. It could be more, it could be slightly less, but it's huge. They're one of the more expensive ones. If you're from Guatemala, it's like a few thousand, maybe less. Okay, but from China, it's a very expensive proposition. So maybe that's why there's more men doing it. It's an arduous, dangerous journey. Maybe that's why there's more men doing it. China is an authoritarian police state that cracks down on political dissenters. So that's another reason you're going to see a lot of people from China.
Right.
They have a pretty high rate of asylum approval. So that tells you something. Whereas say that conversely, like the Central American countries have a very low rate because they're kind of obviously economic migrants. They say asylum, but they're economic migrants. They want a better life. That's really nice, but you're not an asylum seeker. In China, like there's a really good chance you're an asylum seeker, because it's China.
Right.
And so I wouldn't read too much into it. And if the Chinese are trying to do something really bad to us, this is not how they would do it. It would be this would be a very ineffective way of either spying or collecting on us, or even in a worst case scenario, conducting like subversion and sabotage operations. If I'm thinking like with my Navy SEAL hat on, it just wouldn't be the way to do it, honestly. So we have to be worried about China in a lot of ways, and we have to be worried about our southern border just for rule of law's sake.
Right.
But as far as like, are we worried about an army of Chinese like infiltrating and then like rising up? I don't see.
No. Absolutely, and it definitely seems that just the numbers of people fleeing China, and then also even some folks, I'm sure China is probably taking advantage of that in some way, and but they certainly have no shortage of.
Well, these trafficking networks have really, because of the open border policies of Biden, these trafficking networks have become more powerful, and they've developed those networks better and better and better. So now it's a business,
right?
And when there's like this great business going on, there's more people who will apply to it. It's really, I think that's the thing about the open border problem, is it sort of snowballs in that sense, because there's an incentive to create the trafficking network, and once there's a trafficking network, well, then now people know where they can volunteer and pay their money to, and that creates even more demand, and it just keeps going. That's why you got to close the border.
That's right. Well, as we close here, I wanted to end on just one question for you. You are someone who was the same person you were when you got to Congress 5 years ago. You've been principled. You stand on what you believe, and I think that's what a lot of people respect about you. I can't say the same about many other members of Congress, especially even some in our own party, who are just kind of suddenly confused about why national security matters or why we should even be talking about these things. And this kind of isolationist wing of our party seems to be growing in some ways. So I wanted to just kind of zoom out a little bit and get your take on, do you believe this kind of isolationist wind that's flowing in our party is here to stay? And if so, kind of what are those strategies that for those of us who think differently, for us to counter that type of approach?
It's tough, and it's sad, and it's frustrating. It's always been there, so it's not like it's new. I mean, at a certain point, don't get my history exactly right on this, but I mean, when FDR was talking about helping the Brits, and even just providing some material assistance, I mean, you still had like an 80% disapproval rating of getting involved in the Europeans' war.
Right.
Okay, and then times change, and Pearl Harbor happens, but even that wasn't the Europeans, that wasn't the Nazis who did that, but eventually it just took leadership to actually get people to where they needed to be, and then of course, hindsight's always 20/20. It's pretty easy to use your hindsight and look back at World War II and think it would have cost us a lot less to stop that earlier.
Yeah,
that's a fact. I don't think that's a disputable fact. That is a fact. Now, very hard to assess that fact at the time, So you've got to give the people of the time their due credit, and
Right.
and it is what it is. But we should learn, and so I said this in conference to my fellow Republicans when we were debating the supplemental, and I was like, I can't help but observe that everybody here is going to celebrate the 80th anniversary of D-Day coming up here in June, and you're going to act like it's something to celebrate. You're going to act like this is an example of America being on top and doing the right thing, but you're going to vote against Ukraine aid. I'm sorry, but you can't hold those two ideas in your head at the same time. Those are completely inconsistent ideas. Don't give me any. I'm not going to take your bullshit. Those are inconsistent ideas, because what makes it even worse is you're celebrating a moment where we actually sent troops to die. I mean, by the tens of thousands, whereas you're actually voting against supplying a country that's stopping the tyrant for us with no Americans dying.
Right.
I'm sorry, but you don't get to celebrate that time of American, greatness is what it would, which is exactly what it is. It's us doing the right thing. We should have done a little earlier. Would have cost us less, but we did the right thing. You don't get to celebrate that and then refuse to learn the lessons of it at the same time. And so it frustrates me to no end. The isolationist movement, too, I think, comes from it's 20 years of global war on terror, a lot of conspiracies and misinformation and narratives that have been spun out of the global war on terror. Right. Again, it goes back to our leaders also never explaining to people, why are we in Afghanistan? That question still gets asked in debates in Congress and just in the media. What do we get out of it? Why do we do it? And it's like as just casually sort of like asking with the presumption that there's really no good answer. But there is a good answer, and it's very simple. But the problem is our leaders never actually bothered to say it. And the answer is like, why were we in Afghanistan? To prevent more 9/11s. That's it. That's why.
Right.
Next question, please. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So, and did it work? Yeah, it worked. Did it come at some cost? Absolutely. Great cost. My friends. Like, there was a cost. And you can nitpick over whether we could have done it better, for sure. Like, I mean, but again, that's some hindsight 2020 stuff. Iraq, same thing. What do we get out of it? Iraq's a little bit more debatable. But if you're going to properly assess foreign policy, you do have to look at counterfactuals. And I think there's a really good case to be made that if we never touched Saddam Hussein, Iran would be quickly developing a nuclear weapon, and who knows where Israel would be. I mean, that is a very plausible strain of the multiverse. And that's the thing about properly assessing foreign policy is first of all, you have to live in the shoes of the Bush administration at that time, what they knew, what they didn't know, the circumstances they were operating under. Again, hindsight's very 2020 on these things. But I guess my point in talking about those two wars is that I think a lot of people just broke and started to default to sloganeering as their foreign policy outlook. No more endless wars, bring the troops home, and like that's as far as people think about it. Wars are bad. I understand wars are bad. Like that's not the, and you hear it sometimes too, and you hear it on social media. I hear it just casually commented, after seeing all the wars we've seen, we should avoid war at all costs. And I always think to myself, like, at all costs? Because that was the French policy when Hitler was invading. That was the Neville Chamberlain's policy. I think he gets a bit of a bad rap, but it was effectively his policy. He regretted it a lot, and there is actually a cost that you shouldn't be willing to incur, and that's foreign policy is just difficult like that. Yeah. You've got to assess it case by case and do your best, but. Reagan said it best on the 40th anniversary of D-Day when he said that isolationism will never be a good option to stop war and tyranny. I'm not getting his quote right, but we should post it since this is like whatever it was really good. And isolationism is inherently naive, and it is predicated on a belief in a world that doesn't exist. A world where everything's a million light years away and nothing touches each other. The global economy doesn't exist. That's what isolationism as a doctrine is predicated on. And so to hold that belief, and some people do honestly hold that belief. There's members of Congress that at least they're consistent.
Right. Right.
But consistently naive and foolish and I think willfully ignorant of the realities of the world. And that sounds insulting a little bit, but it is, because they call me a warmonger, so I don't care. I'm going to insult your intelligence if you're going to insult me. Yeah. And that is not a good intellectual stance to take. That to believe that your way of life will be maintained with an isolationist doctrine. Yeah. So that's how I feel about that.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of folks when I just say we're thankful for your service, not only in the military but also in the halls of Congress, sticking up for principles and actually standing for something. Even when people say ridiculous names, you just see some of the ridiculous things that have been thrown around.
I like Warhawk. I'm like, Warhawk, thank you. Is that an insult? Because Warhawk.
Amazing. Yeah. But I know that our country's better off with you in leadership. So we thank you. And thank all of you for joining us at home. Stay in touch with us. You can keep going back to hudson.org to see the other events that are coming up. And we'd love for you to we'll see you next time. Thank you.